listen, man, I'm here with Lucas Ketelle of ITRBoxing. Bro, I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm a big fan of your work. And go ahead and introduce yourself, man. I want to know a little bit more about you and your channel and your boxing journey.
I mean, I'm gonna give you kind of a boring one, but my name's Lukie, and I'm from the Northern California region. And my good friend Bilal Mahassan got out of a situation when 2012-ish. And I just was kind of in the gyms. Like I'd kind of halfway followed it. And the funny story is like I've been going to these big events, like totally unqualified, but I couldn't get into local shows. And then for like 4 or 5 years, probably because I did such a bad job covering like those big events, like it was totally unneeded or not necessary for me to be there. Like I was just there, basically just hanging out. It took me like forever to get back to these bigger type cards, but I was really on the regional scene and I took a keen interest into regional fighters because boxing is a sport where there's not much focus on development or regional talent or even fights below on the undercard. Like you go 2 fights down from a fight card and most people don't know anything about those fighters. Whereas
Right.
on any other sport, like one of my favorite basketball teams, the Sacramento Kings, you go to the bench, at least there's like a blog dedicated to like, this is what this guy does. This boxing, like no people
Right.
just go, oh, I don't know where that guy comes from. So I guess in short, that's what I do. I make YouTube vlogs to kind of just speak, and I have a newsletter right now as well as a website. So
Yeah, that's good shit, bro. And you're a great a documentarian, man. I love all the docs you get in the gym, and it's you got a real like refined eye for young talent. So you're catching all these guys that we see all the time, but you're catching them before they really, explode onto the scene for the most part.
I mean, I'd like to take credit for that, but I think that's also just like using common sense, right? So, how much is a promoter going to put money behind a certain fighter, right? Because they're not just going to throw money aimlessly at certain fighters. So, like, there's a formula where you can just look at who are promoters investing money into, and is the fighter good, and do people respect them? And when you look at things like that, like the most obvious next good fighter will be Boots Ennis. It's like a no brainer slam dunk. Yet for a lot of people, he's going to come out of nowhere. It's crazy to me.
Right. Guys like us have been watching him for years, but by the time he's on like a big card or he's a headliner of some kind, you know what I mean? He's for a casual fan, he is going to come out of nowhere, but low key, like we know that he's probably one of the best guys in the entire sport. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's like the frustrating. It's like you got guys like Shakur, Boots Ennis. These are guys where it's like the average fan might not be a fan of their styles or whatever. They might have opinions, but these are the guys that are going to be in the sport for the next decade. Like these are the pillars. Like if you're building a company, you want your Shakur. And I mean, like when I look at like a company like Matchroom, I was thinking about this with Joshua getting old. It's like they're pillars for their company right now. To me, feel like Devin Haney. I might be different, but I think it's Hergovich and a couple other guys like Chantel Cameron's a pillar to me.
Yep.
But like they have to really have a fantastic 2022 because a lot of, I guess, not Nigel Ben, Connor Ben is in that conversation.
I
He's
keep
one of their
going on that
pillars,
too.
but like they have to really start to make some stars because they really built their company, at least to me, off of the Joshuas, off of the Katie Taylors. And now those fighters are starting to hit the back end of their career. And this is when you become a big promoter, is when you do it again, brother.
Right, right. And also, they had Golovkin and they haven't really done that much with him. They had Canelo for an extended period and then he had to get out of that contract and whatever. So it does kind of feel like they had this initial base of fighters that they were working with. And as those fighters get older, I'm not sure that the younger guys are like developing in the exact same way. Like I feel like a lot of young guys, I think about how many tough fights AJ had coming up. You know what I mean? Fights where he's getting dropped and he's fighting tough guys. And I don't know that that's as common right now as it would have been 7 or 8 years ago. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I think like there are guys that are taking the AJ road. I think that AJ was just one of these guys where we were all bought in, and he was kind of a unique situation in my lifetime since like Lennox Lewis, maybe. But see, Lennox Lewis is like kind of like right when the internet was getting going, didn't really know how to use the internet. So I'm not really following the journey. And even though he's like the same age essentially as Mike Tyson, he always feels like the next generation of fighters because he didn't make it to HBO till like what 2002 or something. It's
Right.
like he feels like a different era. Joshua to me has always kind of been a guy who like he looks great, he has a gold medal, he speaks well. How can we keep him in the position to just make a ton of money? And I feel like building up his career for me, I always say this when he fought Joe Parker, that was like the biggest red flag fight ever because he just couldn't handle a jab. It's like Joe's jab was really flustering him and frustrating. It was like he probably won the fight or it was draw. It was like 7-5 fight if we're being fair. And I mean, really, from that point on, he looked like a very vulnerable champion who kind of had a Sugar Ray Leonard like vibe about him in the UK, where it wasn't about his skill set. It was about the morality and the marketing put behind him. If you don't like AJ, you're just straight up a bad person. That was kind of the tenor I got from people in the UK. It's like, we genuinely like this guy. He's a great guy. We love the branding, the marketing, and all that, but there wasn't a lot of fight specific analysis because he's the big average. He's a fairly good boxer, average boxer, good power for the heavyweight, but not exceptional. Everything checked in the middle. And what I notice about great heavyweight boxers are they're actually not average. They typically have one exceptional trait. That's the outlier of heavyweight is you have to be exceptional. And I think that Joshua, now we're going somewhere else, is running the risk of being the modern Frank Bruno if he doesn't find some form of a career renaissance or resurrection.
What do you think that is? Like, do you think it's a trainer switch up? What do you think that is for him?
I mean, I don't know if it's possible at this point. Like, this is like saying like you want to be a pro wrestler at 38. You know, sometimes you want things that might not be reasonable. He's got a ton of money. It feels like the way he fought Usyk, he runs his own camp. You know, it doesn't seem like a coach would be like, you know, what's the best game plan for you? Show him that you can box. You're way bigger than him. You're way stronger. Why don't you just trick everybody and try to box with this? Like, so that basically tells me he's running the show. He's paying people. They want to stay on the show. So I think it starts with a culture shift. And I think it would honestly depend on him not really doing media. I think he needs to do everything that's the opposite of what he does. But a guy like Usyk, right, who's won basically, I think maybe you can correct me on this. I think he's won almost all, if not all of his world titles on the road. Those type of animals, when you give them confidence, that's like a chupacabra. That's like one of these predators that harm people. And now you've given him confidence that I can beat the crap out of you. So
Right.
it's like that's a really tough battle because he's not going to undertrain.
Yeah. I thought that fight was super interesting too. And I think you're right. The idea that he was like, all right, I'm going to try to keep this fight exclusively at arm's length and make it like choose to make it a chess match. I'm not going to make this size a part of this fight at all. I'm going to try to keep my size out of the fight as much as possible, which I thought was fucking crazy. You know what I mean? Like it's basically the only advantage he had over Usyk. Usyk is better than him, and then in basically every other category. So it's like, how are you not going to try to put your body on this man at least a little bit? You know?
I mean, it's like so. Like, what if we're like you said, if we're doing comparisons, it's like he has every advantage of you against you in boxing besides God-given gifts and your physical size, like power, strength, reach, height, and you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna get rid of that stuff. I'm going to actually allow you. We're going to do a boxing match. And you're this guy who's probably, I mean, he might be better than Evander Holyfield. Like the story hasn't been written, but Usyk could go down as the greatest cruiserweight ever. He's doing something historic. It's basically to me, it's him and Holyfield are the two best ever. And to try to fight a guy like this when you've seen prior opponents who have been physically rough with him really give him hard fights, kind of got mid-level guys, and to not look at those fights and go, this guy's like a top 30 heavyweight, and he gave him. Now, the other exception is Usyk the classic guy where if he fights a guy that doesn't kind of get him up, does he just kind of, I know I can beat him? Like, are those fights is there not much to take from those fights? Are those deceptive fights as a coach? Or should you have been sitting there and been like, okay, even if this is the worst version of him, there are habits that he has, there are patterns he goes back to that I can just maul forward and do that. I just don't see the confidence in AJ anymore where he's willing to exchange or punch with people.
Yeah, he's not. He definitely is. I definitely, from the second Ruiz fight, would describe him as gun shy. I just feel like he's holding his guns a little bit because he's afraid to leave himself open. But because he's holding his guns a little bit, he's more open. Like there's less reasons to not let your hands go against him because his style has like, I would say it's really pacified in a lot of ways. He's not like a killer. I never thought of him as like a killer, but I did think of his power as like above average for sure. You know what I mean? I thought of him as a guy, he catches you one clean and clips you, you know, you're going to go to sleep. And I still think he's that, but it's almost like he pulls them or he's not committed to him in the same way, you know?
I mean, I think that you brought up a good point. It's like there was some switch where he used to fight to win and now he's fighting not to lose. And it's very evident as an observer when you can see someone who's like, they're not going to take those chances they once took because they don't want to go back to being on the ground, being a big old buff guy that the girls think are cute, who's a multimillionaire. And now you got the big fat Mexican guy who you thought you were going to spark out in a couple of rounds. He just dropped you. You feel you got spaghetti legs and you're just sitting there saying, I'm living my own nightmare. And with Usyk, it was kind of like in a weird way, deja vu. Like he doesn't seem to do well with people he feels like he's vastly superior, is an observation I'm saying while I'm listening. Like he looked at Andy Ruiz's body, saw the late notice, and he goes, yeah, I can handle this guy. This guy's going to be out of there. I think it's even deeper than that is like we're looking at someone who it's hard for him to get motivated for certain fights, even if he knows Usyk, he's this great guy, but I'm bigger. We both won 2012 Olympic medals, but I was super heavyweight. He was heavyweight. There's like these weird little caveats that I could see a fighter creating. And I think that's where the problem with him, it's not just the fighting not to lose. I think he runs the show. And I think that with a fighter who makes this much money and is this powerful, how do they not run the show? We see it all the time in the NBA, right? Does LeBron James is he not the head coach of any basketball team he's on? Is
Right.
Tom Brady not the head coach of any football team he's on? It's just the nature. They make too much money and people want to be involved because if you're involved, you make more money yourself. So I think with Joshua, the problem is the voice is him telling other people how he wants to do it.
Right. And I would think other great fighters, the guys that are at the very top right now, they might be the boss everywhere else except the gym. You know what I'm saying? Like I have a hard time imagining that Canelo tells Eddie Reynoso how he's training that day. You know what I mean? But I think that's part of why it works so well is because there is that respect and that trust. And he's not like the CEO of the gym also, you know? Maybe I'm wrong, but I think Joshua definitely has some of that.
I think it's a mixed bag because like I think that there's guys like George Foreman historically in the past. I bet George Foreman did whatever he want. I have no knowledge. And George had a great career. So I mean, I think it just comes down to who the person is. Like I've been in the gym with fighters, as I'm sure you have, where they barely train and they get to a certain point, and when they fight the guys that are their equal, then all of a sudden the training, all those years of bad habits, they catch up to them and they don't go any further than they should have. At the same time, I've been in the gym with guys who really shouldn't have been much, and then they overtrain and they far vastly superior move beyond. I I think it's a temperament thing. I think some guys, when they get to a certain point, are just going to run their own camp. I personally don't think it's a great thing, but at the same time, if someone's winning more than they're losing and they have a ton more money than me, you just have to accept that it's part of the sport. I get what you're saying about Canelo. I think an example I would bring up would be Lomachenko. Like Lomachenko is probably like a fighter that I think most people feel kind of sick of because people always go Lomachenko, 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 and he's all that. But to me, he's like a guy who his whole legacy is built around his father. He just wants to win for legacy and to prove his dad is the best coach. That's kind of what motivates him internally. And I think that that's what's so interesting about Loma is you have a guy who became one of the greatest boxers, but it's basically just out of his love for his father, just to tell the world my dad's really great. It's like
Right.
this story that's not completely getting unpacked because we're so in love with these Drago narratives with an Eastern European figure. When we're looking at someone where the basis of his talent, I feel, comes from a place of love.
That's a real cool way of looking at it. And I think they're also one of the rare kind of father son duos that seem to really have a system worked out. You know what I mean? That when the going gets tough, they don't panic. I think that's like a common thread with like guys who have their pops in the corner is there seems to be like more of a panic mode that hits when shit gets rough. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, and look, like one of my closest friends, Gabe Flores Sr., he got
Yep.
criticized for the handling of his son. And I always stand up for him because I go, imagine you're living the worst day of your life and your son, who is your everything, is going through something and your son's saying, let me keep fighting. And you've done everything for your son. And then a bunch of dickheads on the internet want to talk about you when they haven't even seen the way he's changed his life in the last 4 to 5 years to be a great father to his son. Then we get another person I think the world of, Ken Porter, does the exact opposite. And people go, oh my God, he's making it all about himself. Where is this father middle ground? Because it feels like when a father actually cares, if they care too much or seemingly they want to let their fighter be a fighter, the fans, it just seems like the fathers always get cooked because the fans are looking for a reason to go, man, that dad wants it all about him.
I, I hear what you're saying. I think it's a lot of times it's more about he doesn't want to make it about him. It's just that maybe there are times where dad coaches are like kind of incapable of removing themselves emotionally from it. Where I feel like obviously if you have a good coach, they're emotionally invested in it, but not in the same way as if it's your own kid. You know what I mean? So I feel like that can not always. I feel like it can like impair judgment in the corner.
Here's my pushback. If you work with someone long enough, 10 years, it becomes like your kid. So I mean, it's not like these people don't have that same type of emotion. Maybe
Mhm.
they don't sleep at the same house, but I mean, it's like a family member now.
Yep.
So it's like, I guess to me, it's like if you do boxing long enough, the people you're around are going to become like family members. And really, it's just technicalities. People are like, oh, the father coach. It's really like your uncle. If it's not a father, most of these coaches are like uncles. The worst thing you can do is have someone who's coming in at the end of your career who's just in there for a business relationship because there's zero relationship.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, there's no emotional involvement at all. So I think that it's mostly just people kind of looking for reasons to criticize people because I think the problem, this is what I think the problem is. The the fathers oftentimes are very protective of their son and their parents, and where maybe a coach would be like an uncle and they take time and step back. The father, at being a father, one of your goals in life is to protect your child, and they're trying to protect them from a really bad night. And I think that what the fans criticize is fathers who are trying to be stand-up fathers shielding their child from the blame tend to get all the blame because what they're doing is they're attracting all that negative directly to themselves.
That's interesting. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's interesting. So, what did you think about the Kenny Porter, Sean Porter stoppage? What was your take on that?
It's fine. He grew up, he raised Sean. Like
Right.
if you raise Sean, you've been to all these tournaments and you see something that says I need to stop the fight, it's fine. And Ken Porter is a hard-nosed boxing coach, and if he says some stuff that the average person doesn't like after a fight, well, guess what? It made his son a two-time world champion. That's who he is. It's like that is an intense individual that had to go to intense means to get his son to be that. I'm fine with it. I'm not really the biggest fan of, hey, we just had a fist fight. Let's stick a microphone in someone's face. It's like two guys with concussions. Let's just stick it like wild stuff happens. I'm
Yeah.
not expecting someone to give me an Einstein quote coming out of a fight where basically a father is taking his son to war. That's what boxing is, right? And I think that we try to be too rational with an irrational sport.
That's an interesting take. That's an interesting take. I'm sitting on that for a minute. My initial take on it was honestly a little more critical because it just felt like, again, his emotional involvement in Sean as a person and not as a fighter. Like, to me, it felt like he bailed. To me, it felt like, and I felt like he bailed punitively, almost in like and then talking about his training and shit after, it felt like he did it in like this is what happens when you don't do it my way. Maybe I'm looking into it too hard, but that was how it felt from the interview. But I also agree with you, like, people are in this incredibly emotional state. Like, you've literally just been in a battle, and then it's like 30 seconds later, hey, you want to put a sentence together?
Well, it's so like I think that what we saw was he went so Crawford goes down or Porter goes down twice. Crawford basically in his corner, basically from what I remember, someone Bomac was like, "You're losing the fight." Crawford basically comes out and he's like, "Oh crap, I'm losing," and he just decides to beat up Sean Porter. It's like
Yeah.
once that happened, it's like he overnight changes the game plan, just starts taking over the fight. Let's say Ken lets it go. Do you think Sean's making it past the 11th and 12th?
Not sure. I think that he earned the right to find out, maybe. I think
But
Sean
see,
Porter is a
this
great
is the
enough fighter.
slippery slope because what happens if one of those punches now Sean can't be on TV?
I'm 100% with you if he's taken a 10-round beating, but that's a 50-50 fight that was like a chess match, walk on eggshells kind of fight and not a banger. And to me, it was just like a bad round where he got dropped a couple of times. And that's not a position he's used to being in. He's used to putting guys down. But I think those are moments where you can kind of claim your greatness even more. You know what I mean? Depending on the fighter and depending on the fight. But he wasn't taking a beating. Obviously Terrence has gears, and that's what makes him, one of the best to ever do it, probably. But I just thought that was a moment for him to kind of prove his mettle, and it got taken.
So the way I look at it is I thought Sean was winning the fight. But when those punches landed and he went down within seconds of each other of getting up, I felt like the fight was completely over because whether he got up or not, it felt like Crawford now. What we know about Crawford is he's one of these finishers. He's in the vein of a Sugar Ray Leonard. When he has you hurt,
Yeah.
it's really, really bad. And Sean Porter and Ken Porter know Crawford. And the way that I felt about the stoppage, and I could be maybe too much of trying to be a human being in this, is Ken Porter was there for the camp. He knew something about this camp. He kept saying we didn't train the way I wanted us to train, which told me that they're not necessarily shortcuts, but he knows for him to go through that type of a thing, they didn't meet the standards of the Thurman and the Spence fight. Whatever that means, it just tells me they didn't meet those check marks. Follow that up with they know Crawford. And Crawford's one of these really scary guys that if you're hurt, he's looking not just to stop you, he's looking to hurt you.
Yeah.
And what I saw was the father in the corner seeing something about his son that he doesn't know. Like he saw something that he's seen when he was a younger version of himself. And he said, I don't want my son dealing with it. And I think that in the interview where people feel it was punitive, he was pissed off. He
Yeah.
Because Ken's legacy is going to be defined by his son Sean, and it should be. But I think he didn't want that type of outcome. So I think that a lot of it was his frustration at the result. And I think that that's where the fans kind of got that. But I mean, that's just the way I see it.
I definitely hear what you're saying. And honestly, it was the way Terrence switched gears, and he always has a way of doing that, of taking it one more level up right when you're starting to like gas just a little bit, and I thought that it was one of the biggest wins of his career. what were some of your highlights of 2021 this year? It was kind of a
Oh
weird
man.
year in boxing, but
No, it was exceptional, historically exceptional.
yeah,
Historically exceptional. I think that it's kind of ironic, right? Because 2020 was kind of like this year that's historic because the world kind of stopped. And we had a few good fights, like we had Loma Teofimo, but it was largely kind of like, let's just get boxing on TV. Maybe the opponents might not be good, but it's like, okay, we get to see a great fighter like Shakur. We get to see Valdez. Like it was just like, let's just get a great fighter in the ring. Let's get him there. Top Rank did an exceptional job with the bubble. PBC comes. I think this year was such a good year for boxing that I forgot that there were fights without crowds because that's how long the boxing year was. Like, I mean, I forgot where we started. And it's weird because it was like I thought Valdez McGilbert Schelt was a badass fight. I know people feel like that was very one sided, but that was kind of like a historically amazing fight for me for Valdez to have that focused of a performance coming off the Velez fight. But really, this fall stretch felt like football season. It was just a good game, good fight every weekend.
I mean, I thought it was a pretty wild year too, and I thought it was the ultimate kind of comeback year, like you said, from a year where the whole sport is essentially shut down, all of life is essentially shut down, and I think that Canelo's activity is a big part of that. Um, Aside from who he's fighting and what he's doing, I just think that it's really pretty incredible that like the top pound for pound guy in 2021 is pretty insistent on fighting like 4 times a year in a year where it wasn't easy to put fights together. You know what I mean?
Look, everything's a little bit easier if you're Canelo Alvarez. So, like, people say, oh, yeah, it's not easy. When you make as much money as him, all of a sudden, weird doors open. They're like, wait, the money man wants to fight 4 times? Sure. Like, we will cater to your needs. Where do we need to hold this? It's weird how when you make money, all of a sudden, people are nicer.
Yeah, but how many
Play,
guys that make money like that do fight 4 times a year? You know what I mean?
No, and that's the exceptional. I think what was great to me was obviously Canelo's the fighter of the year because he went after historical greatness. And how many guys at the top of the sport go, I want to be an undisputed world champion? He didn't seek matchups, he sought champions. And after doing that, now we're kind of left with, well, where does he go next? Because the criticism would be, oh, you're finding these sexy matchups, but they might not be the ones we want. Well, this year he gave us what we wanted. He fought Saunders, he fought Plant, he gave us a brutal knockout highlight reel with Yildirim. He gave us one of the Smith brothers that does Smith brother things. You know, they get to the top and then they lose to the good guys. He did all that stuff and then proved that he was the best guy.
Yeah, 100%. What do you think is like his most logical path moving forward? Because it seems like he's willing to fight like from 154 to cruiserweight. And you know what I'm saying? Like, what do you think is his best path from now?
I mean, it's like I think that Beterbiev is in the plans because Beterbiev looked really off to me. Like it looks like the train is coming to an end with Beterbiev, like with Marcus Brown. He just looks slower. His reflexes aren't the same. He looks less dangerous than he might have a couple of years ago. And that's like possibly one of the 5 best light heavyweights ever, if we sit and think about it, because light heavyweight's been such a historically weak division. It's
Yeah.
like if I was a manager, I would only sign light heavyweights because if you sign 5 light heavyweights, you probably will get a world champion because it's like as long as you have someone who can get to the finals in a national tournament consistently, it's like the depth because most of the light heavyweight division is super middleweights that just get a little bit bigger and they're like, this division's not that good. I'll just fight at light heavyweight. And then they become the best guy in the division. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the theme of it. Roy Jones, Bernard, Andre Ward, like those are 3 off the top of my head that were outstanding in that division. None of them started there. So what Canelo for me, it's like Beterbiev is probably in the fall, right? And then it's just like, who does he want to do? So I think that obviously this cruiserweight champion is interesting, you know. I shouldn't say interesting, but I mean that's another historical thing. I think it also opens up the door for a Bridgerweight fight. I do think though, if Canelo goes to cruiser, he's not coming back down. We're getting catchweight city. We're getting we're getting catch weights, but I do think I've always thought Canelo is going to win a heavyweight world title. I've always thought that he wants to end his career with a heavyweight world title because that would put him in the realm of possibly being the greatest fighter ever. And I
And
think that
it's
that means a
fucking
lot to
bulky.
him. Yeah. So, I mean, I think
It's a
that,
big kid.
but, and imagine if they did Andy Ruiz versus Canelo Alvarez in 4 or 5 years for the heavyweight world title that's vacant. Like, that's not an unfathomable fight to happen. Put it in like Mexico City, put it in Vegas. I mean, you're looking at a fight that could do a lot of pay per view buys that would have a lot of people interested.
Yeah.
And I mean, that to me, that fight has always just felt like free money.
Ruiz and fucking Canelo. I'd never thought of that before, but that's like a, I mean, you're right. It would be fucking enormous. People would
Because
go
to me, that's the biggest fight you can make in boxing is Andy Ruiz versus Canelo because it's like it's two fan bases. They train together currently. Who knows if Andy will stay there or whatever? Because Andy has this history of dancing around with trainers. So I mean, if he stays with him, I guess the fight won't happen. But I feel like Andy's always going to be a guy that's with people for 2, 3 camps. Then he's going to go to the next one. It's like he's been with every great trainer and he's still
yeah.
like, I want to see what this trainer does now, you know? So I think that that's one of the big fights. I think that he's going to come back, maybe get the cruiserweight title. If he doesn't do that, then I think the more interesting thing to me is what network do you think he's on? Because I think that there's a good
Right.
chance he's on ESPN.
I also can't think of a fighter that I have no idea what weight they're going to fight at and no idea what channel they're going to fight on.
Well, think about the greatness of Canelo, where you can't just think of one weight class to think of opponents for him. So you have to be like, okay, where is the best fight for him rather than who in his division is an interesting fight. And I think the tough part is like the guy that I always wanted to see him fight, just in terms of a purist standpoint, was Demetrius Andrade. Well, that fight's left the window probably forever because he's moving around so much. And it's like Andrade's now 2 divisions lower. He was supposed to fight Andrade. And I mean, it's getting to the point where I just want to see Andre get a fight, but it feels like the industry as a whole is so frustrated with him. Like, feels like Showtime doesn't want to have him fight any of their fighters. Matchroom doesn't really have any guys. Like, they got Golovkin, but Golovkin's old and he doesn't want to get outboxed by Demetrius. So it's like Demetrius is a guy that I really hope gets an opportunity in the near future because I don't want his career to be Aaron Pryor, where
Yeah.
it's like people just sit and tell you what he could have been. I'd like him to at least get the chance to show the world where he's at.
I want to see him fucking school Jaime Munguia. And I like Munguia, but he'll fucking school Jaime Munguia. I'm dying to see that fight.
Well, I think that this Ballard's going to give Munguia a hard fight. And I know a lot of people have been giving me crap about it, but I think Big Meech Ballard, that Big Meech, I think he's going to give him trouble because Barry Hunter's a solid coach. Paul Valenzuela had a big pressure style. Sure, Valenzuela was having success, but Meech had a decorated amateur career, and Steve Grifford, who's fighting Joe Smith, they both got signed at the same time to Golden Boy. He's been developed for years and years and years. Obviously, Munguia is the favorite, but I think that like Munguia is a guy who's going to have hard fights with guys that he doesn't get up for. And Ballard's going to get up for Munguia. Will Munguia get up for Ballard?
I think that's some of the danger, not of like and not to say that Munguia is sheltered, but I think that's part of the issue with like plateauing and not creating exciting fights and trying to let shit like marinade. I remember that was a big thing that Bob Arum used to say it like it needs to marinade. I think that's some of the danger of letting it marinade is if you're not giving these guys fights that they're fucking jacked up about, you can get a flat performance. You can get like a Tyson Fury against Cunningham or, you know what I mean? Like that shit does happen if, and obviously it's the best fighters are equally ready to fight the best in their weight class or to fight me and you. They're ready no matter what. But I think young fighters can plateau out if you don't give them something to get jacked up about.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't like, I just look at this fight and I see so many people being like Munguia washes Ballard. And we're looking at a guy who's from a professional team, Barry Hunter's Headbangers. He got an extensive amateur career, more so than Munguia. And he just fought a guy that preps you for it. Munguia is one of these guys where he is getting better. He's more of like a
Sure.
he's at least having some form of defense now. I think he's more than like a Beck the Bully because the all gas no brakes fighters get stopped by Rosado and he was able to do that. That being said, like for where he entered our boxing collective against Saddam Ali, we haven't really seen that next step. It's just been a whole lot of side steps since Dennis Hogan. He basically lost to Dennis Hogan, doesn't get the decision. And there's a collective of, oh God, we don't want to mess up this money. Let's just move side steps. Let's see how we can keep him. And I think the other thing was, remember when he burst on the scene and everyone was bringing Canelo, Munguia? Munguia is now out of that conversation for life. Like
Compl-
nobody brings that up anymore. And I think that should tell you about where the world sees him because we used to see him as one day he'll fight Canelo. Now it's like, well, maybe he'll fight 41-year-old Golovkin. Like that's where we're going now.
Right. Maybe he'll fight for a title, or maybe he'll, you know what I mean? Maybe he'll become unified somewhere. But yeah, I remember hearing people talking about him and Canelo, and the interest isn't there just because he's looked extremely vulnerable against guys that Canelo would probably smoke, you know what I mean, or has smoked. Like I think another one of the Smith brothers, Liam Smith. You know, he fought Liam Smith. He got hit so much in that fight. I'm just like, I can't imagine that him as a young fighter, this is helping his development to take this much punishment. Like he's got to learn some kind of defense.
Now I'm going to be devil's advocate because I'm old enough to remember when Canelo came out and people thought he was the new Butterbean. They thought that he was the
Yep.
new marketing tool. And Canelo's transformation was incredible because he went from being basically a side act to becoming like the greatest Mexican boxer in history, which I believe he is. So Munguia is kind of this novelty attraction, but where he was at compared to where Canelo was at, there's not like a huge gap. He's still a young guy. I think it's just really about when they're ready to go, they really got to decide to go with Munguia because I think that me as a spectator and me as an observer, when you go, you hit the gas, you go for a fight, and then you go, oh my God, I'm on the brakes now.
Right.
That's when we as observers go, is there a lack of confidence?
Right.
And
What you
we're
worried about? What you worried about?
yeah, and we're predators, right? This predatory sport, and the observers are just as much as predatory as the people in the sport. So then we're not gonna go, what are you worried about? We're gonna go, okay, we see what's going on here. We see
Right.
what's going on. And then the sad part is whether it's Munguia's decision or not, it weighs into my entertainment level. So now when I tune on the fight, I go, he's not really fighting anybody. They're moving him down. I'll watch something else. Maybe I'll watch a good college football game. I'll flip over third or fourth round. I don't have that same level of excitement. I don't enter it with the same level
Well,
of
and
enthusiasm.
to be fair, by the time Canelo was Munguia's age now, he had fought Mayweather and Cotto and fucking, you know, he had already fought some of the greats of the era before him by the time he was in his early 20s. You know what I mean? He had to learn some hard lessons already. And I feel like Munguia's in his mid 20s now and is still in like the Gabe Rosado gave him a tough fight phase. You know what I mean?
It just feels like he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. It feels like he doesn't have it. I know
Training is fucked though.
Robert Diaz is a great matchmaker at Golden Boy. And it's like he's doing as good of a job, I think, as anyone could with Munguia. But I think the problem is you have a fighter who's very entertaining. He could be a Mexican legend. I think that in terms of Mexican old school Barrera Morales type violent wars, it's Jaime Munguia and Emmanuel Navarrete. These two dudes are like the throwbacks to just brutal violence, right? So there's a part of me that wants him to be on TV for 7 to 10 years because it's reliving 2002 for me. It's reliving 2004.
Right.
Barrera beating Hamed with the Tapia trunks. You know, I'm going back to that place. I don't with both of those guys. There's big red flags about longevity. And with Munguia, I'm getting to a point where it's like he's taking punches regardless. Why
Yeah.
don't we just put him in with some of these fights because he's gonna be done in the next 4 years with the damage he's taken.
I know, and that's always my thought when you have a high impact guy like that, where I think the volume that he puts on is a problem for anybody, right? Like he's got the motor to do it, I think, but the skills aren't quite there. And I just think that like with a guy like Munguia, if he's gonna take that much punishment every fight, even in fights he dominates, at what point do you become like what's a good example? Like a Juan Diaz, you know what I mean? Where you get
Glenn Tapia.
right. That's a great example too, where you get to the big fight and it's like it's not there anymore. I kind of felt like that with Jarrett Hurd. You know what I mean? Where it was like every fight, he's just taken a massive amount of punishment. And after the Lara fight, it was like he ran out of juice.
Well, I think also if you look, I'd give Jarrett a little more credit. I think that Julian and Jarrett kind of took the rest of their careers out of each other. Maybe Julian still has
Totally.
a little bit more, but I think that fight, people sleep on how brutal that fight was for both guys
It
and
was
that performance they both had to give. And I feel like they created a classic and they kind of set the tone for their careers. But at the same time, in Julian beating Jarrett in that fight, that was a lot of Julian Williams' heart and soul to get to that place. And we saw it in his next performance that it was like it was hard to get back to that place.
Yep.
And with Jarrett, it's like we're just seeing him get old. It's just like his
I thought
body's
he
like
had
done.
that with the Lara fight. And the difference was what I thought was so unique about him was it was like he just walked through it all. He'd find a way. Like the volume and the pressure that he put on was gonna bust your pipes at some point. You know what I mean?
Physical toughness.
Exactly. But I think you saw the last of that against Lara. And then when he got to J Rock, they both went at it was like, a car wreck, basically. And I just didn't feel like he had that walk through anything thing anymore. And he finally broke. You know what I mean?
Well, and I also think Julian, like he made an effort to
What a great fight, by the way. I'm not taking away from
oh
Jay.
yeah, but I mean like Julian in that fight, I feel like did something Crawford did to Porter. So Crawford to me had made an effort to make sure to push Sean back physically because everyone said, "Oh, Sean's the bigger man, the stronger man." Everyone looks at him, and there was a round where he literally just pushed him across the ring. He literally leaned on him, shoved him across the ring, and even though he's not winning the round, that was like a moment where I see Ken Porter looking and being like, "Oh no, this guy can just shove my son back." And I think that with Julian, he fought on the inside to tell Jarrett Hurd, "I'm not going to be scared of you doing the bully stuff, coming forward. I'm going to fight you. And I'm going to at times push you. I'm going to be physical. I'm going to hit you on the inside. I'm not just going to be a guy using a jab." And
Yeah.
I think that also, on top of maybe Hurd having those wars, someone standing up to those fighters and handling what they do, historically, it's always a problem for these kind of physical, tough fighters.
Yeah. Right. There is something that breaks mentally if you can take it.
I've always thought that like a pressure fighter, because I'm a guy that I hated pressure when I was in the ring. Like that was so then how did I counteract that? Right. Well, I became the guy that tried to be educated pressure because I knew how much I hated that feeling. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to put it on people because I've been to that place and it's a very difficult place mentally to go to. So if I can take people there and I'm tough mentally, let's see if some of these people will. And I think that oftentimes guys develop that pressure style because they hate being pressured themselves. So when guys pressure them, it's like you're living your own nightmare.
By the way, bro, I love your workout videos because I think it's so easy like to be in this space and we can do a lot of talking, but it's like when you show people like, look, this thing that they make look easy, it's not. You know what I mean? Like, and I could tell you know how to throw a punch and shit, but it's like for normal guys, like shit that fighters like I'll just do 50 burpees and not be breathing hard. Like people don't even realize what it takes to get to that.
I mean, and like, look, like I'm not even training that hard anymore. I might run 3 miles today and I might do some squats and stuff, a little leg exercise. But people don't understand, like, it takes 3 hours of training pretty much 5 days a week to do make things look really boring. You know, like to be in shape, the greatest compliment of being in shape is you're able to make things boring. When you're not in shape, that's when things get exciting because you're like, oh God, like I remember guys would come from strength and conditioning and they'd spar and they couldn't. And this is like why I feel like I bring to boxing. They can't move because now their legs are done from the heavy workouts. So they had to fight in the pocket. And people would know, oh, so and so came from strength and conditioning. I'm gonna get on him. And I almost said someone's name, but I won't put it out there. But you, there's always certain guys in the gym, right? And you don't want to spar that guy if you're not healthy because they're known for putting it on you. They're the pressure fighter. They got the looks. And then there's certain guys, I'm not saying they're easy, but everyone wants to work with them because they know they're not going to always go super hard. They're more technical. They use the word, I'm going to work with you, you know, and that drives a lot of people nuts because it's like, what are you working with? Like, you know what I mean? What is working? Like when oh, I just want to touch. I want to touch, work on this. So everybody's trying to get, oh yeah, I'm tired. I'm going to get 4 rounds with them. And I think that dynamic, because people oftentimes in boxing, they look at it and they try to be geniuses, right? They're like, okay, let me get out the protractor, the triangles, the isosceles, the square root of this and that. It's a physical sport.
Yeah.
The number one root of this is a physical sport. Number two thing is conditioning. Technique helps, but it's conditioning, toughness, and it's mental fortitude. It's basically war. It's physical war. And I think that in boxing, often the answer is the simplest thing. We often try to go, oh, well, he did this subtle movement and dropped his shoulder and all that. Sometimes he's stronger, he's tougher, he's quicker, he's more determined. Those are the answers to what really happened. He might not even have seen what you're doing on YouTube. It's just he wanted it more. And I think that boxing, what's so interesting is when we love it, we try to see things that are often not there. Kind of like someone, like I like hearing these unexplained stories. I know you're waiting to talk and stuff, but now I'm taking over. Is I like listen to like chupacabra stories and alien stories. I love hearing strange stories. There's a urban legend called the smiley face killers. I'll look up all these things and I'll go to dark places. And I think that not unlike those things, where people sometimes see things they want to see, like with aliens, or they're seeing a fragment of truth sometimes, and then they put themselves in, okay, now my life is defined because I saw a UFO. I think as a boxing fan, we have moments of truth where we think we see something, but it's really just the fighter is just an exceptional fighter, and we're putting our love and passion into it. And I think that's what makes this sport so special.
Give me an example of what you're talking about.
I've actually got a perfect example. So Jake Paul versus Tyrone Woodley, where people were talking about, oh, it's like he set up the punch with this thing or that thing, or it's a fake punch. Honestly, I don't think either guy have been fighting long enough to really know what they're doing. I think it was intuitive and he was looking for a shot and he landed. I don't think that it was a super well, maybe he was going back to some stuff BJ Flores had worked with him, but from that point, with as little amateur experience as he's had, even though he's devoted his life, a lot of it's instincts. You know, I doubt that he can even at this point recall moments in the fight still, because it's probably moving so fast for him, even though he's doing it at the highest level. So I think that when people were really trying to break down that, to me, that was kind of making something out of nothing, because I think what I took from it was this is an exceptional athlete who wants to win. And he just made it work. I'm not sure if it was the technique, but he saw something and he jumped on his moment of opportunity.
Right. Like there's no way he put as much thought into that punch as you're putting into it with slow-mo and arrows and fucking, you know what I mean?
Well, do you really think we need a Lomachenko breakdown of Jake Paul versus Tyron? And I'm not even being funny because like people are like, oh, it's a fake punch. First off, what man wants to get knocked out by a YouTuber willingly, even if you're getting paid money? Like no man wants that, because it's not a good feeling. Yeah, you know, it's like that's first off, if you really think that, you got like go find something else where like get into government conspiracies or something. Like find something where where you can actually find out about the stock market. Put your time into something that's more beneficial. If you're going to put all that energy into something that makes no money, find something else. And then to think that he's like Lomachenko also, I think that's a disservice, because it's like, I watch a lot of amateur boxing, my man Dakota. I watch probably as much as many people in the world. And it's like, even half of the good amateurs, I don't see them really seeing where they're going in the fight. So it's like, to be able to say someone's setting up a punch in the 6th round, that's only about 10 to 15 fighters in the world currently, in my opinion. There's only 10 to 15 fighters that I think are really doing, and I'll do this, touch, running the sequence, touch. And they're really just looking, they're needling, they're moving their head to set up one shot. And I mean, maybe he was looking jab, touch the body, overhand, right? Something of that fashion. But I don't think that that's more of a game plan. I think that's more being an athlete, finding a pattern, breaking a pattern. It's not really like a John Madden analysis of let's break down where his feet were and all this. No, he just saw a moment,
Right. And it's certainly not planned or predetermined in any kind of way.
And I feel like I'm just talking to myself. I'm sorry about that. But like Loma, right? Loma, I could, if you
talk about Lomachenko all day, bro. I'm a big fucking fan. Talk about Lomachenko all day.
Well, like, this is what I'm saying. Like Lomachenko, if you tell me in the 3rd round, his dad says, okay, we're going to circle 3 times to the right, and then you're going to go left to the body, jab, right hook, and we're going to just really focus on that, I could buy into it, because that's really probably what they think. Right. If you give me like a guy that's on Showbox who's had good fights, but with limited competition, you're like, yeah, he was waiting until round 6 to get this. I'm not going to buy it, because it's like now to be fair, I could be wrong. And I've been wrong before, where there's guys where I thought that it wasn't true, and it turns out they are true because the body of work wasn't there. But I got to keep it a dollar bill, because I can't lie to people. There's too many people in boxing that lie to people. So imagine how confusing you would be if you didn't know anything about boxing. You come into this sport, and most of the media outlets you look to be reliable are telling you mostly technical wrong information. So your basis point is confusion. And then you're looking at stuff and you're going, I guess what he's saying is right, but it doesn't seem that way, because we all have a truth in ourselves. We all kind of feel what's true. And I remember being a fan, and I'd be like, that doesn't feel fully right, what I was hearing. So I feel like our sport, unlike any other sport, and I want to commend Andre Ward and Tim Bradley, because I think they do good technical breakdowns on the fight and they help the viewership. But I think our sport, unlike any other, there's a lot of kind of like chatty patty, and there's a lot of just kind of conversations while stuff is happening. So the viewer doesn't really learn what's being set up. They get a conversation and a philosophical debate, but they might not understand what's coming. Paulie did a good job at foreshadowing, but I think outside of a few broadcasters, we don't foreshadow into what the future will be. And when you can't kind of allow the viewer to kind of get to certain places through narration, I think that they go to wherever they're going to go, and sometimes they get lost.
Right. So I thought, I grew up on HBO boxing, and that shit was like, I felt like they built up a narrative for most fights, but it wasn't something that the fighters weren't offering, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't feel like they pulled shit out of thin air as much.
I feel like HBO's big thing was the story of the fight.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, we're going to do the story of the fight is Marvin Hagler is in Southpaw. Marvin Hagler is now in Southpaw for this fight. And there was a narrative construction. And I think that was a great way to view a fight, right? Because you have, it's a summer, like, so if you're judging a fight and you've seen sparring and all this stuff, how could a guy win a boxing match? But if you went and told your buddy and it was sparring, oh, so-and-so got the better of the work. Like, that's the disconnect in our sport, is where like you can watch a fight that's a pro fight and you could think, well, Mike Fox beat this guy, and then 3 judges give you the wrong decision, and then no no sanctioning or commissions want to do a thing about it. Everyone knows Mike Fox beat Gabriel Maestro, but everyone's like, it's just the way it is. We don't want to upset. Well, what is the point of our commissions if they don't at least somewhat stand up for injustice that's fairly obvious? And that's the problem, is like, we also have broadcasts where it feels like it's just kind of like a buddy system. I think that Sergio Mora does a good job, but the no disrespect to Goosen or Lennox Lewis or Brian Kenny, that broadcast has no chemistry. And it's like very all over the place. And this is what's building the new boxing fan in America, are these
Yeah.
telecasts.
And I feel like Fox in particular, I think they're the worst at it, where they have an idea of what the fight is going to be. And then the whole commentary is an effort to match that, even if the fight isn't really. They've been pitching it this way. This is how it's been sold, and this is how we're going to commentate it, even if the fight doesn't necessarily match that.
I just don't enjoy their telecast for multiple reasons. And it's a shame because one of my favorite fighters has mostly fought on Fox, and that's Jesus Ramos Jr. I think that he's a fantastic young fighter. And I like their product for the most part. I actually enjoy what they're doing more than Showtime because they show me so much more fights. I'm a fan of watching these fights, and I don't understand why Showtime doesn't just put a steady cell phone camera in the ring and just put it on Showtime Championship Boxing on YouTube. Because it's like, in 2022, it's inexcusable that guys that are whether regional or signed fighters, if they're fighting on these big stages, which is one of the biggest moments of their life, why aren't these fights being documented for these young people? Because it's a big moment in their life. So I think I'd like to, I'm not criticizing Showtime in a negative. I just wish that I want to be a voice of change, and I'd like them to do that. Now, my issue with Fox is, first off, there's too many commercials. So it's like they'll cut, I've seen them cut in the middle of a fight to commercials because they oversell ads.
Yep.
There's weird pre-fight videos. So like there'll be fights that have an extensive video package, and then there'll be, for no rhyme or reason, another one that doesn't. And the storytelling component mixed with the in-ring action, just, it doesn't blend seamlessly. So you have, okay, this is the story. Okay, now Vito Milanicki is struggling with this guy. So it's going to be like sheer utter panic, or there's no, how are we getting to this place? It's very, very much like, this is our guy. This is being an upset. It's not, I guess what I'd say is it's not an enjoyable listen. It's just like a scattered, all over the place production. There's not really a lot of research. I'm not being taught in the broadcast, which is something I like. Now I'm like acting like a broadcaster, but I like a little reference to the past and statistical analysis at times. And it just feels like guys hanging out.
It definitely does sometimes. What's your real world wish list for 2022? Like, there's the fantasy fights that we all want to make, but I don't know if they'll get made. And then there's real life. Like, what's your real world wish list for this year?
I mean, you're probably going to laugh because my wish lists are going to be like fighters that like people probably wouldn't, they're going to be lesser, like not like the super sexy fighters.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to start with Xander. So I would like to see Xander Zayas in with like, I don't know, like a Greg Vendetti, or like a guy that's challenged, maybe Dennis Hogan. I think, how about that? Xander Zayas versus Dennis Hogan. That would be a pretty fun fight for me because that would be an interesting bout. I'd like to see Jesus Ramos get a world title shot this year. I'd like to see Charles Conwell get a world title shot this year. I'd like to see Gabriel Flores Jr. Win and then get a big kind of fight at 130 by the end of the year. I'd like to see Navarrete versus Valdez. I'd like to see Gary Russell fight 2 times a year and fight someone that's like very, very good, because I think that he's one of the most talented fighters in the world. At 40, I want to see Arnold Barbosa Jr. fight for a world title because he's been sitting around waiting.
He's so talented.
I'd like to see Hergovic in with someone that we've heard of. Like, I mean, he seems like a guy that's pretty good. Like the gyms are saying that he's really good. I know that there's like a conflict of interest where I believe the same coach trains Hergovic and Otto Wallin, but it would be kind of nice if those two could seamlessly fight each other because they're occupying that same space of foreign fighter. No one's super keen on fighting. And
Throw
then
him
they could,
Luis Ortiz.
I mean, Luis Ortiz, first off, like he had a shaky
Passing of the
performance.
guard for the boogeyman of the division. You know what I mean? From one
No,
boogeyman to another.
yeah, I mean, it's just like Luis. I have no problem with what he's doing because what Golovkin's doing, it's like they're in their 40s and they're just like, dude, I was really trying to get there when I was in my mid 30s. Just let me get a fight where I can just get a Bentley and have a
Yeah.
really cool house. Like that's basically what they're saying. They're like, dude, I spent like a good 6 years getting meaningless fights. Um, I don't know. I'm definitely all in on what's his name? Okoli. So
Yeah,
I'm
bro.
give me Lawrence Okoli 3 times a year. Like I think he's the next guy at
Give me a
heavyweight over
Coley
there.
Usyk, bro. Give me a Coley Usyk in the next couple.
Yeah, I mean that's one that I'd like to see. Who's another guy I'm all in? I like Lee Wood in general. Him versus
Yeah.
Conlon. I think Lee Wood's got a chance
That's a good
if
fight.
moved right to be the fighter of the year because I think that if he gets a big win over Michael Conlon, it's kind of set up for him to kind of have a really big year if he could move up to featherweight because featherweight's pretty darn vacant because you could possibly see Lee Wood beat Conlon, go up, beat Warrington. Like that right there, those are two big wins. And then he just would need a third win. And he's basically in the running to be like a breakout fighter. So I think the way that the schedule works, if he really focuses and puts his energy down, I think Lee Wood could be a guy to watch next year.
Yeah, he's definitely a sleeper. The couple of times that I've seen his last couple of fights and I didn't really know him, and I was very impressed. He's definitely a sleeper.
I think the thing with him is like, and this is just a boxing thing. When we first saw him, or maybe you didn't first see him, but when I first saw him, he wasn't the fighter he is now. And there's like these conceptions with guys like Juno Carroll, or especially for me with UK guys, where they're not, I don't have as much access to them in gyms. So I see them and then they disappear. Like with Juno Carroll, I assume the Juno Carroll that fought Tevin Farmer is the Juno Carroll that's now. And he's actually improved. Like he's improved a bit. And he's seen the thing about like a Carroll is he seems very humble and he's trying to get the most out of his situation. And that's what makes him the dangerous fighter is he's like a go-getter. And with Lee Wood, he's now with Ben Davison, who's one of these elite coaches. He's like kind of a coach that's being it's like what is it? Whenever Kanye West drops an album, the person that they say Ghost wrote or was the creative influence becomes a megastar. So it's like 808s was Kid Cudi, so Kid Cudi's stock raises. The one that sounded like Nine Inch Nails album, that was Travis Scott. And then it's like that's kind of how boxing is with these famous coaches. They have a good fight. So Ben Davison had that bout with Fury where he has this fantastic draw performance. And I think Lee Wood might be one of these guys that emerges from that system. And people are like, I don't know, like his performance against Can was
Yep.
pretty incredible because Can's this guy that just throws a ton of punches, high volume. Sure that he didn't look like the best version of himself, but we can't criticize another fighter for a fighter not looking like themselves. That could just be the performance they put forth.
100%. I think definitely anybody can look bad if somebody's having, a tremendous night. That's kind of what that fight felt like because I thought Ken was going to win handily, to be honest, and then it just didn't. It didn't look the same.
So I got a good fight for you. Xander Zayas versus Kerman, the Revolver Lajarja. I'd
Oh
like to see
yeah,
that this year.
and get a highlight reel knockout at the end because that boy comes forward fucking head first.
But I mean, like, I'd like to see like Xander take maybe because he had a lot of fights last year. Maybe like the Revolver, Dennis Hogan, maybe one other fight, maybe if he could get like a Patrick Teixeira, like those
That
type of guys,
154,
because I
right?
think he's ready for that level of competition. And knowing people around him, I think that he wants to, because like you got to remember with Xander Zayas, he did a full training camp and knocked a guy out in a round. Like that's time to graduate, because it's like, imagine how depressing that would be as a competitor. You give so much sacrifice and then you just start a guy in a round and you're just sitting around for 3, 4 months. Like, dude, I wanted to go a little bit longer than a round.
Right. I wanted to show a little more of what I got. I think like part of that is because he's a teenager. You know what I mean? So they're trying to move slow, but I think that he has graduated already. And I think boxing age and number age is totally different. And he's much more mature in his boxing age than his actual age.
And I mean, there's also like one of the funnier stories of last year, I think it was last year, was Brandon Adams being Sergey Boacek. And Brandon Adams is never getting rewarded for that Boacek fight where he came in as the blatant B side and he stopped Boacek, which I thought was kind of like a fairly obvious outcome when I was looking at it on paper, because it's like Boacek is kind of a limited high motor guy who kind of gets hit a lot, and now he's kind of being rebuilt. What do you think Ring City's ever coming back?
Ring City.
Yeah, the NBC Sports, they were like Thursday night boxing, like club show boxing.
I don't know that I ever saw that. I came up on Friday night fights on ESPN, like Teddy Atlas type shit.
Okay, well you didn't. That's interesting because it was on last year, and I think it did very bad ratings. And I'm curious to see if it comes back. But that's telling when a hardcore fight fan didn't even really know about this thing. Yeah, it was on last year.
I had no idea.
That's not good. That's not so. Marketing department for that entity, you
And I'm
guys.
in deep.
I know you're in deep. You're talking with me, and that's basically, this is like the deep sea or the deep web. So I think that's interesting. So
Aside
yeah.
from Xander, who's some of the young cats that you're excited about?
Well, obviously, I believe in Gabe Flores Jr. So I mean, he had a tough fight, but I think the
Oh,
guys
Leslie.
that, yeah, but I mean, like, I think that it's also like guys that dominate in the amateurs for as long as he did. It's just going to be trial and error. But when he gets to the point he needs to be, I think he's going to be very dominant. Obviously, Shakur, obviously, Keyshawn Davis. There's a guy that's I really like in the lightweight division named Charlie Sheehy, half white, half Filipino, exceptional fighter, very tricky, very, very tricky. Extensive time on the USA team. Let me think. So, who are some of the other good young fighters? Raheem Gonzalez is good. He's an amateur light heavyweight. I think he's going to be the most dominant light heavyweight in the next 10 years. Raheem, like he's going to be like a once in a lifetime type light heavyweight. He might be the greatest light heavyweight of all time because he's going to probably start at light heavyweight, but he's winning. He just won gold in the worlds. I like Jamal Harvey. I think Jamal Harvey is the next kind of Shakur Stevenson, Keyshawn Davis, youngest fighter to compete internationally and won gold. So he fought, I think 3 or 4 Olympians from 2020 and beat all of them. So, and he beat the number 1 seed from the Olympics. So, I mean, he's probably, if all things considered, we're probably going to give him the number 1. It's like 1A, 1B. Raheem and Jamal are the 2 best in the country. It's pretty obvious, just nitpicking who's better. Omari Jones is really good. I'm probably saying too many. I like a guy who's fighting this weekend, Jahai Tucker on Top Rank. Jahai is a really good body puncher. I think that it's rare to see young fighters that invest to the body, punch so well to the body. With him, I think it's just going to be, it's all about, like, the thing about boxing. I say this to a lot of young fighters, and you're probably just sitting there annoyed because I'm just talk, but whatever. It's, you got me going, is you're going to have the first 4 or 5 fight. And I forgot Tiger Johnson. Tiger Johnson's amazing as well. These guys, you have your first 5 fights and you're excited. You're like, damn, we're signed to a promoter. We're so excited. We're so excited. It's so fun. Then you get to 6 through 12 and you've been fighting the best in the country, tournament after tournament. So by your 6th fight, you're kind of like, okay, so when's the hard fight coming? But you got to remember, you're no longer a fighter. Now you're an investment. Now you're being brought up to make money in the future. So it's no longer that system that you once understood. And the good pros, what I've noticed, believe in the process that's laid by a good team. And then that team builds them into the scenario. And it takes a special fighter to be disciplined and believe and to not be like, man, I need to be in a 10-round fight because I saw this guy on TV and I could beat him. And they're just yip yapping. And then they go on Dakota's boxing show. Hey man, I could beat this guy that's on. I'm not being paid enough. I'm only in 6-round fights. I'm only fighting 3 times a year. I used to be in the nationals. I'd fight 30 times. I get money. I'm a boss, blah, blah, blah. All this type of stuff, right? Very common. You see all this stuff. Very, very frustrated. If you can ride out that storm, because when you get into the real fights, it's very difficult because every fighter, when you fight your equal, had the same dream, the same pedigree, and the same ambition. So in pro boxing, you get to a point, and when you get to that point, we find out real quick if you're the guy or if you're not the guy.
Right.
And for all young fighters, I said a lot of words to say this. When you get to that position, you got to be ready for that position. You don't want your lips to talk faster than your fists.
Yep.
And that's the thing, is a lot of people think they want it, but they don't really know what they're asking for. I think a good example of this would be Josue Vargas versus Zepeda. He wanted to fight Zepeda, but Zepeda is a very high level fighter, and no disrespect to Vargas, but that's a cautionary tale for young fighters that are trying to skip the line. There were still fights to groom you in that position, but that felt like they put pressure on the matchmakers and the promotion. Hey, we're better than all these guys or something of that nature. And Zepeda was just too experienced at that moment. Or even worse, Vargas fought with too much emotion, which you should never do in a fight, and got caught with something very early, which could happen to anyone.
Yeah. That one felt like a premature bout for him to be taken because the competition jump between Zepeda and the fight he had before that was fucking enormous. There's another.
Well, that's my friend. He fought my friend Willie Shaw. So Willie Shaw, it's like Willie had a very limited amateur career, and Willie caught him in the first round with a good punch, but Willie doesn't have that experience yet to know how to finish that situation. So now you give Zepeda. So Willie had maybe 12 amateur fights, but he's a very good fighter. It's just he's learning on the job, right? Zepeda has had the job, and he's already learned at the job, and he's the foreman of the job. He's not just learning. When he goes to the gym, young fighters come up to him and he goes, "Oh, I've been in that situation." He's a coach within the gym. "Oh, I've been in the ring. I've been on TV doing this. Try this." And they go, "Oh, that actually works." So when Willie had that success, I guarantee you Zepeda was looking at that and said, "Okay, and this guy who has less experience as me, but probably hits similar in terms of power, he did it. I'm not gonna fall in love with that shot, but I'm gonna remember that." And then I think that's where that came from.
And he's got the experience to read the little openings that maybe Vargas has given him, that most people in the world wouldn't be able to read.
And I think it's beyond that, Dakota. It's the composure. So when he reads it, he's not tense. It's like he knows that he's there. He's not putting pressure on himself. And what I saw with Josue Vargas was I saw a young man that night was going to define him. And I saw his knuckles being tight. Yeah, and he's starting in a way that was not positive for him. He's starting tense, he's starting angry, he's starting aggressive. Whereas if you had that buildup and there's tension, why not just win some rounds with your jab? Why not just start slow? Make that guy get frustrated. Just win slowly and then open up later. I don't like the idea of trash talking and trying to slug with someone unless you got Curtis Stevens Golovkin power.
Facts, bro. Facts. There's another young guy that came up on the top rank bubble that I'm pretty excited about. Robesi Ramirez, Cuban fighter.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
I think like he's gonna have a lot of the same problems that a lot of really excellent Cuban fighters have, the Rigondeaux and the Laros. But I think You match him against anybody in the 126-pound neighborhood, he's a tough puzzle.
I mean, it's obvious when you look at that division, he's the next guy to be a world champion. Like, I think that we all believe Navarrete is probably moving up because he's a big guy. Like, I don't think Navarrete is staying at 26. Maybe he
I don't know
is, but
how
I
he
feel,
made 22.
I mean, we're like when Navarrete, it's not out of sight, out of mind. We're looking at a 5 division world champion because he could probably get a belt at 30. He can probably get a belt at 35. And when he gets old, if he sneaks a 40 belt, and then that's a legend career, you know. So Navarrete feels like he's on that track. Rabisi's one of these guys where that first fight really soured me on him. And I know he avenged the loss, and I know he has a new team, but there's something about how when he got dropped in his first fight and there was no sense of urgency, he got up and was like, "Yep, I just got dropped. Okay, let me get back." And there was like no like example. Tiger Johnson in his pro debut, there's a head clash. He gets cut. He goes and beats up this guy. It's like, "Oh God, you cut me. I'm pissed." And he just
Yep.
stops him a minute later. I'm never going to not forget the fact that Rabisi Ramirez's natural inclination when that happened was, whatever, because that's something that's never going to change in him.
You don't think he sees red enough?
I think it's the literal stereotype of a Cuban where he's too amateur. I think he grew up where a knockdown didn't affect him. So people were probably like, if you get knocked down, stay composed, don't break your game plan. And I
Right.
think that it's like for us, I think this is the way to think of it. Imagine if someone told you to pick up a book and read right to left, but all your life you learned left to right. It's going to be hard and you're not going to do it naturally. And if you do it, it's going
Right.
to be very forced. And I think that's what it is with Ramirez. He learned so early to adapt that mindset. It's going to be difficult. And I know that he has the elements, the talent, and obviously the competition. He's capable of fighting that level of guy and from the Olympics. But can he be better than a Reagan Diao? Can he be better than a David Morrell? Can he be better than a Yuriorkis Gamboa, Arislandi Lara? Can he be better than a Joel Casamayor, a Jose Napoles? Because those are our Cuban legends. Am I missing anyone? But that's the Cuban legend team right now.
Yeah. I think he could be potentially comparable to a Lara. And I think that at this point, Lara is legitimately like a great fighter. I think because he actually got over the hump a couple of times, you know what I mean? Or and has been ripped off, I would say, a handful of times as well. Um, but I think that Ramirez can be in that category. I don't know if he can get up above that man, but I just think he's a really talented kid, and I hope he fucking gets a big fight somewhere in there.
So I know Brad Goodman's going to put him in with the best situation for him. Guys that I'd like to see him in would be like Adam Lopez, Isaac Dogbo,
Yep.
King Louis Correa, because I want to see how he handles the physical toughness, right? Because we know he's talented. I want him in there with a talented, physically tough guy. I think King Louis would be an interesting one. At 130, I think it's like it would probably be an amateur boxing rematch, but him versus Hobson Konsakow would be a very interesting fight because they have
Yep.
similar kind of very amateur styles. I know Konsakow is fighting Xavier Martinez. That's a hard fight. I think Xavier's going to win that. But when we look at Cuban boxers, right? Jose Napoli's gold standard because he came first. Then after that, it's like Lara made it to pay per view. Casamayor made it to pay per view. Beyond that, it's like everyone else. It's like Regan Diaz is probably the best one. He came over late and he never really got the fights. And then, in my opinion, Lomachenko was just flat out better. He was bigger.
Yep.
And the kryptonite for all Cuban boxers, and I'll just say it is, when they fight their equal, they have no ability to fight on the inside. And it seems like this modern version with Yo Elvis that just beat Clay Collard and David Morrell, they're really focusing on being more pressure fighters. It seems like they're very aware of this, but that old Cuban style is very like avoidant, move, straight punches. And when guys close the distance, like Angulo Lara, there
Yep.
were gaps where it's like, what do I do when the gap is closed? Like, what do I hold? There's just a lot of hesitation. And I think that that's my fear with Rabisi is when guys close the space against him, is he going to be able to adjust and fight in those spots?
Right. How does he handle that heat? I'm not sure, but I think I just from what I've seen of his feet, I just think it would be hard for somebody to pin him. You'd have to be really good to pin him. The same way you'd have to be really good to pin Lara. You know what I
But
mean?
the conditioning pins him. That's going to be the thing is guys that maybe overtrain. It's not going to be the technical. It would just be the I'm hitting you in the elbow for 6 rounds straight. I'm shoving you. I'm throwing an elbow into your
Right.
neck. And when you go, hey, he's
Yeah.
cheating, I hit you in the left ear and now your ear's bleeding. Like those are the guys that I think
They're
are
doing
going to
shit
be
that wouldn't necessarily even be scoring in an amateur fight.
they're the guys that are annoying. Like
Yeah.
on Showbox, Edwin de los Santos was that kind of fighter where it's like he's loading up on power and he's just physical, and it's like you can feel that he's never gonna have a fight that's aesthetically pleasing if he can't knock the guy out because he's just a mean guy. And it's like that is a part of boxing that I didn't understand when I got into boxing is sometimes there's mean, angry people who are just they can beat really talented fighters because they're just really mean.
Yeah. That's definitely true. I've definitely had some mean motherfuckers in the gym that are just like, I know that on some level I should be able to handle this, but they're just a lot meaner than I am. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that's the part of this sport that people don't really understand is like there are some guys that like might not be as talented as a Rabisi, but they will scare him because in their mind they could rob him, in their mind they could punk him, in their mind they could stand up to him and just do whatever, and they're going to bring that to the fight. And those guys, the real scary ones, don't typically talk. That's the scariest part. They tend to be like, hey, they disguise their meanness. Hey, it's nice to meet you.
It's
Like
like
they look weak almost. And then when you get in there, it's like they sneak up on you because you're like, wait, this was the guy that was nice. Because I had this happen to us with Guy Robb versus Miguel Mariaga. Mariaga was reading a comic book and they had him wearing glasses. And this was the learning lesson for me. I was like, oh my God, this guy, like we were in the elevator, guys mugging him super hard. We show up fight night and he's a dog. And I'm thinking to myself, what? They just set us up. So all week he's just friendly. Hey, nice to meet you. Like real friendly. We go in there, it's a different person. It's a different animal. And it was just like, and that was in hindsight, all those fights Mariaga got, if Guy won it, that would have been Guy Robb in those fights. So, I mean, that was the crossroads moment. So it's like, but credit to Miguel Mariaga. A lot of people look at him as a journeyman, very, very good fighter. He happened to never get the big win, but he's kind of like I can't even think of a guy to compare him to, but he's the hall of very good. He's the guy that the good fighters beat.
he's kind of like Louis Collazo kind of deal.
Yeah, that's like a super fair. Although I think Louis has like a better win than him with Victor
Sure.
Ortiz, Ricky
Yeah.
Hattons.
Better career.
But but I mean, like Mariaga gave like everybody he fought in his prime, he gave a hard fight. He marked up Lomachenko's face. He gave Valdez hell. Like it was like he was a guy where you didn't really expect much when you were fighting him, and then you get in there and he's giving you one of the hardest fights of your career, and you're just thinking like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I guess I'm curious in all of your documenting and interviews, what's like your best gem? Somebody ever dropped one?
Okay, you're throwing my question back at me. I like that. Let's see.
I always like learning people's gems.
Uh, I mean, like one that I think that people that like your show would enjoy would just be that like being with Teofimo right before the Teofimo experience happened. So I was at the Top Rank gym and I drove to Vegas from the Bay Area with this girl, Taylor. And then she booked an Airbnb and it was like in the hood. I should have just got us a hotel, but she was like, no, you pay for gas. I'll just get the Airbnb. And it was like in the hood. She picked me up at like 4 a.m. She didn't sleep. So she drove and then she slept. I was going to take her to the weigh-in to shoot photos of the Crawford Horn fight. And she slept. I go to the gym. Teofimo was like 20, 30 minutes late, right? Shows up and he shows up. He's like, hey, I'm like, hey, Tio. We go in there and it's just like top ranked gym, but there's literally like nobody there. And we're kind of just talking or whatever. And then his dad comes, and Junior's a great guy. Junior's like, hey, what's up? And he comes in, and so we go in there. And there's nothing really about this story other than like that version of Tio you could just feel was a superstar. So it's like he takes his shirt off. He's got like the cut off sleeves. And not unlike they'd hate me for saying this, not unlike Lomachenko, a lot of Tio's motivation, I feel, is to prove that his father is the greatest trainer. So it's like his father would be like, my son's the greatest. And he starts jumping rope faster. He's like, my son's the strongest. He starts hitting the bag harder. It's like you could see how like they became what they became because it was like the father knew how to speak to his son and they both just loved being around each other. So we go and then Junior, he goes, or Tio goes, hey, we're having a party at our house. And I'm like, okay, well, that'd be cool if I could come or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not thinking we're gonna go. So I'm like, I look at Taylor and I'm like, okay. And then the father invites us. So I'm like, okay, get the GPS. And they live in this gay community. So we leave. We go, big house, you know. And so then I'm drinking. Taylor's a recovering alcoholic, but they keep giving me drinks. And keep in mind, she didn't sleep the night before. So she had a photo show. She stayed up the whole night, then drove me to Vegas, which was 8 hours. Then she slept for like 2 hours. I get her. We go to the gym. We go. She shoots Teofimo. I do my Teo doc. Then we go to the house. Now I'm doing her biggest like vice. She did like sobriety for this. I'm drinking. Teo's in the pool. And then by midnight, I remember she was like, I just got to call it a quits. And we go back. And then I think I had like 3 beers and she was laughing. She was like, are you drunk? And I'm like, I don't think so. Right. But the capstone to this story, I see Junior the next day at the fight, Crawford versus Horn. And he goes, you guys ate like Vikings last night. Oh, you guys ate like, because like he literally brought like, he'd be like, brought like a hot dog. He's like, hot dogs, strip steak. And he just kept cooking. So it was just us. Like nobody, I guess no one showed up that night, but they like had like $300 worth of food. And I was just drinking beer and it was me and Taylor. And it's like they had like every entree you could imagine. Chicken wing. And it's Junior. He's like, chicken wings, real good chicken. But it's like, it was like an 8-course meal, 9 o'clock after we filmed in the gym. Teofimo's playing in the pool. And it's like, it's not stopping. And I'm like, they keep giving me Heinekens. I think I was drinking that night. So like it was like a plate of food and a Heineken. And it just kept happening. And I'm just like, what the hell? And then the next day, the capstone was Junior sees me. Oh, you guys ate like Vikings last night. And it was like, when I tell that story because it's like Tio's been through a lot, right? Tio's been through a lot. And that's kind of a story of life. But I'm going to always remember that day because that was a special day. I was once with Teofimo in a Fresno hotel room with him and his dad and just hanging out with them as people. Because I think that a lot happened with Teofimo very quickly, right? He went from being a guy that no one besides myself would film to being someone that every single person wanted to film him doing backflips and TikTok dances and everything. And he's someone that was motivated by proving people wrong. But I think that the hard part was the world wanted to see everything he did. And I think that he was someone that's like Conor McGregor. He's at his best when there's a goal that's set very high and he's in seclusion. And the more the world saw of him, I think the harder it was for him to deal with. So I really cherish those memories because I think Tio is going to be a Hall of Famer. And that I think that is a big one for me with Tio. And I think he's going to be, when he comes back, I'm trying to think of a good Gabe. Okay, here's a good Gabe Flores story. So Gabe was going to go to the Worlds, or he did go to the Worlds, got silver at the Worlds, should have won gold. We're sparring someone. They go, hey, I'm making the documentary 2015. This is G Squad Nation. Dad goes, hey, film a little bit of this just for the documentary. Guy comes out, throws craziest overhand right. Junior drops him 2 seconds into the round. This guy was a world title contender. He just fought, I won't say who it was, but he just fought someone for a world title. We drop him in 10 seconds. Dad comes over. Hey, did you get it? I go, Junior dropped him so quick, I couldn't even record. Like, because when they go, I'm not trying to start it like, hey, I'm filming. I was going to gently and then, just raise the phone up a little bit. He dropped him. And when he dropped him, the whole gym went, oh, like it was because we were sparring when the 5 to 6 o'clock doctors and those guys were in this gym. So we were doing it like a gym that had clients. But because of the scheduling and all that, we were sparring when they're so all the people in the class look over at the ring and we're like, oh, so like the whole gym is awkward. And basically like 2 to 3 weeks out from a fight, Gabe Jr. was in like a fight of the century type fight. He handled it, good composure. It was actually the perfect sparring to get ready for the Worlds. But that was memorable. I share the Teofimo story because I think a lot of times people are interested in Teofimo, and I think a lot of times people don't understand how good of a person him and his dad are, and I think they're very misunderstood. So those are the two that come to mind.
That's awesome, bro. That was really cool. Anything you want to shout out, bro?
I mean, I don't.
Shout yourself out. Should.
No, I mean, like, look, if you like the way I talk about boxing, I got a newsletter. It gives you all the club shows. It gives you all the boxing. It gives you all the news and updates. The first one comes out on like Wednesday, Thursday-ish. It's Lukie Boxing at substack.com. Just go straight to your email. It's super easy. You don't want to sign up to the email, go to ITRBoxing. I post the same thing to my website. I just created a Substack because some people like it emailed to them. I got a YouTube channel. I'm literally doing like a lot of interviews tonight. I got like 5 or 6. One of which I'm excited about, Bruce Shushu Carrington. So I'm excited to talk with Shushu. I think I have videos on the channel every single day. So if you like daily videos, that's probably a thing. I mean, I'm not out here begging for anyone. So if you enjoy what I do, just like it's not super hard to find me. I don't care if you follow me on social media, but follow my creative endeavors in boxing. That means more. Like I don't need people to be listening to my every word or my neurotic tendencies, but really appreciate you, Dakota, for having me on your platform. I enjoy what you're doing. And I also want to say, keep doing what you're doing because I see your passion. I see your love for this. And I appreciate the fact that you're talking to fighters that a lot of people wouldn't talk to. And I think the problem with this sport is we have too many people trying to occupy the top of the sport when ESPN and DAZN and all these big broadcasters with big paychecks, they do a great job talking about the main event and the co-main event. But some of these guys on the undercard, there's not a budget for them. And I appreciate that you got a friend of mine, Aaron Coley, on, that you got Mike Guy, who is someone that trains with my friend Ace Johnson. You're getting these guys and you're bringing them on, and even if you're not telling a story, even if you're just hanging out with them, you're giving them dignity and respect. And I think that that's more than boxing at least used to before YouTube do. So I wanted to give credit to you and just keep going because I know your viewership will go up in the future.
I appreciate that, bro. I really do. I've been working at it for a little bit. I'm also not really out here begging with my hands out and shit. And yeah, I appreciate that. And for anybody that watches my shit, I think this is one of the best in the game. So definitely been a pleasure chopping it up with you, Lukie.
Well, I hope I didn't just talk the whole time. I feel like I didn't let you talk, but I appreciate it and it was fun.
Hey, bro, I'm sure this is not the last time you and I are going to have a conversation.
Okay. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Really a pleasure to be on. Support his channel, hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff.
All right, my brother. We'll talk soon. Appreciate you, man.